Hey everyone! So I recently read Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, and for a first published novel, this is pretty darn amazing. I think it's important to emphasize first published because for quite a lot of authors, they publish their first novel as in the first one that they wrote, especially a lot of self-published authors. In the case of Brandon Sanderson, he had actually written about 5 novels prior to this one. It's just that this is the first one he actually managed to successfully sell. So I'm going to put this down now. And by the way, this is a spoiler-free review. So, what's it about? So there are 2 cities next to each other, one called Elantris, and the other one called K, which is kind of in its shadow. And Elantris used to be amazing, but it's now kind of like a zombie leper colony. And there are 3 main characters. The first one is a prince that basically becomes one of these zombies. This is not really spoiler territory because it happens in the first few pages. The second is a religious zealot who is trying to convert the people in the other city, K. And the third is a foreign princess who is betrothed to the prince and is actually officially married to him because of the way the laws work, and she gets involved in the power struggle. So, random thoughts while reading. It's got a fantastic start, although I immediately thought, oh, this is a zombie thing. But it's really more zombie, leper, vampire kind of thing, and even that doesn't really capture it. It's its own thing. It's something kind of totally different. It's not your typical zombie situation. And that's what's great about Sanderson. He can come up with new ideas. From the start, it's like, this is not your typical medieval fantasy setting. It's such a fresh world. And the jargon, there's all sorts of made-up names for things that don't quite have an analogue in our world, so it is good that they have different names, but there's no glossary in sight. My wife would hate this book. Although that's not actually true. While I was reading this, I was actually explaining to her what was happening in the plot, and she was quite interested in it. But yeah, I think if she actually read it, the first few chapters would really put her off because of all the jargon. Sanderson is such a joy to read. I find his writing economical, which is probably an odd thing to say because he writes such chonkers. It's extremely clear what's going on, and it feels like every paragraph has a purpose for being there. It's moving the plot forward. I also love the format of the story. Every 3 chapters, he's cycling through the 3 main characters, 1 chapter per character, and the stories often intertwine, so you'll end 1 chapter and then you'll see maybe that same event but from a different vantage point. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes it goes straight on. He also has an interesting stylistic choice of starting his chapters in media res, as it were. There's never any kind of connecting passage like later that day. It's just you start straight in, someone will be talking or something will be happening. You're never confused. It's always very clear what's going on. Every chapter is kind of split up into vignettes, and they're just like these short, sharp scenes of something that's happening. And it's usually quite clear what has happened in the meantime. He may reference it, but none of that connecting stuff is there. It's the epitome of showing rather than telling, which is fantastic. And the characters are all wonderful. The main prince, called Rayoden, he's very inspiring. And the Princess Serene is fun to watch as she manipulates and brings this foreign perspective to the land that she now calls home. And even Harathan, the religious zealot, who is, for want of a better word, the bad guy, he is shades of grey and understandable in his own way. And even the minor characters are all fascinating. In some cases, it's just a bit too unrealistically nice, but that's only occasionally. And the world building is top-notch. The magic system is neat, and there are these curious orbs that are kind of like personal Siri devices. But note that this was written in 2005, before Siri was even invented. They're a constant mystery and, well, I shouldn't say anything more. Unlike a lot of fantasy, religion is quite a focus in this book, with multiple religions and denominations vying against each other. It's very well done. I can totally see why Harriet McDougall decided Sanderson was a good candidate to finish The Wheel of Time. One minor negative, I found it hard to keep track of some of the characters near the start of the book. There's quite a lot for such a, well, not exactly a short book, but it's a book that's short by fantasy standards. But that lessened as the book went on. Also, there are definite, I wouldn't call them plot holes, but shall we say unlikely world context. I can't say too much without being spoilery, but I think people in the population should know more than they do. The change that made Elantris fall from this kind of beautiful city into this kind of leper colony only happened 10 years prior to the start of this book. And I feel like there should be more knowledge in the populace about what it was like in that period 10 or more years ago. I also sometimes find Sanderson's descriptions a bit too sparse. There's a character called Kin, and the layout of his home is a total mystery to me. At some points it seems like a regular suburban home, and then at other points it seems like it's a castle almost. So that was very confusing. One random thought I had about Sanderson is there's a lot of conversation in his books. At times the Princess Serene is just sitting around with these merchants that she's working with, and they're just chatting backwards and forwards, which is fine, it's enjoyable. But oddly enough, it felt at times like I was reading a David Eddings book, because David Eddings has a lot of conversation in his books. And I know that Sanderson is a fan of David Eddings, so it would make sense that he would have some influence on Sanderson's writing style. For those who haven't seen it, this is the 10th anniversary edition, so it has some extra deleted scenes about the Mad Prince, which are available on Brandon's website. There's an epilogue with Hoyd, and there's an extra foreword and a postscript by Brandon. There's also a section describing the Aeons, which I don't think was in the original, and that section is very out there. I haven't read any of the other Cosmere stuff. I've only read the Mistborn trilogy, the first trilogy, and this, so a lot of it seemed to go over my head. Maybe I'll come back and reread it once I've read more Cosmere stuff. I also read all the annotations that Sanderson has for each chapter that are available on his website. They give all sorts of extra background detail and his thinking behind the characters and their motivations and the general plotting of the book. They're very worthwhile to read. I also read The Hope of Elantris, which is a short story you can find on his website. It gives another viewpoint towards the climax of Elantris, and it gives an extra little bit of story which happens some months after the end of Elantris. It's a nice little extra, has an uplifting ending, and there's also an annotation describing the backstory of why he wrote it, which is very touching. So it's a solid 4 stars from me. I can't quite give it 5 because of the plot holes, basically, and I feel like there was a bunch of things left unexplained, which was in some ways disappointing. He has spoken about maybe writing a sequel, so maybe he's just leaving some extra stuff in there that he can hopefully expand on in the future. Okay, let's review the maps. The maps in Elantris are pretty good. I give them 4 out of 5. These are the maps that I have in my edition, which is the 10th anniversary edition. So there are 3 maps. The first map is of kind of the world of, I don't know how you pronounce that, Scylla or something. So very nice design, very nice sketching, very interesting font choice, bit of flavor text down here, bit of flavor text up here. The religious zealot kind of comes from this empire over here. The princess comes from this country over here, and the main action takes place in this small country over here, which gets its own map. So this is the country of Arelon. So again, very nice design, slightly different fonts because it's by a different map maker, I guess. Looks pretty cool. There's all these kind of provinces, and then up here is Elantris itself. So it gets its own map. So this is the map of Elantris, and it gets its own double-page spread. It's kind of nice. It's nice that there is this different font again. I like that. But I have a problem with whether this is to scale or it's just representative. It's kind of trying to straddle a middle ground. It looks like it's to scale. It looks like, okay, there's a building there, there's a kind of fountain or some pool or some horse thing here. The problem is that it's not actually like this. I get the sense from reading the book that this is more just representative. There are many places in the book where Elantris is characterized as being much bigger than the city of K on the right, and in this map that's just not the case, and they just kind of feel small. It just doesn't feel like it should, and so I kind of think that they failed on this map, and so that's why I'm not giving it 5. I can only give these maps 4 out of 5. Still pretty cool, but not quite perfect. Just out of interest, in the first editions of Elantris, this is the map that everyone got, and when you compare this to the other map, it is a little bit confusing about what is going on. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention this just to give you a comparison. And one final thing I'll point out, there is a blog article about Brandon's map progression, which is quite fun to read. He started off with MS Paint, which is quite funny. And this is the progression to get to the first map in the first edition. He doesn't talk about the new maps in the 10th anniversary edition, but this is an interesting article if you're into maps. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. I can totally see why Harriet McDougal